Freedom of Information Act, also known as the Sunshine Law, because it shines light on government meetings and records. It is essential to our democratic form of government. South Carolina's Freedom of Information Act makes records and meetings of public bodies open and available to citizens and their representatives in the press. This openness is important because it allows the public to learn about the performance of public officials and the expenditure of public funds, where the money is going to. As a citizen of South Carolina, you have the right to attend meetings of commissions, councils, boards, and other public bodies. You have a right to see and copy records of public bodies. A record cannot be withheld and a meeting cannot be closed unless a specific exemption applies, such as executive session, which we'll discuss later in our session about meetings. A public body is an entity supported by public funds, even in part, or that expends public funds. Public bodies include state and local agencies, school boards, and city councils. Committee and subcommittee meetings are included. Even nonprofit agencies that receive public funds are subject to the Foia. Federal agencies are not covered by state law and have their own Foia. And South Carolina's Foia starts with the presumption that all public body records and meetings are open and available to the public. The law says public records include all books, papers, maps, photographs, cards, tapes, recordings, or other documentary material regardless of physical form or characteristics that is prepared, owned, used, in the possession of, or retained by a public body. This includes electronic records such as emails. The Foia does not require a public body to create a record that doesn't already exist. If part of a document can legally be shielded from release, that doesn't mean the entire document may be withheld. The agency must separate the exempt data and release the rest of it. This usually means taking a marker and blacking out some information, also known as redacting. You as a citizen are fully within your rights to make a Foia request. In the town of Lyman, like many other public entities, there is a formal process including a form to fill out and submit to the local clerk. Public bodies must respond to a written Foia request in a timely fashion, but no longer than 10 business days, unless the requested record is more than 24 months old, in which case the deadline is 20 days. If no response is received within the set limits, the request must be considered granted for non-exempt records or information. The law requires, Foia, the public body to produce the requested records within 30 calendar days from the date it initially responded that the request will be fulfilled. When the public body requires a deposit, it must produce the records within 30 days of receiving said deposit. That deadline is 35 days for the records that are more than 2 years old. So what kind of records are not required to be disclosed under the Foia? Great question. Public bodies in the Palmetto State are able to withhold certain specific records. Exemptions are discretionary, and these exemptions must be interpreted narrowly to increase awareness of all citizens of government activities. Exemptions include, and this is not a full detailed list, highly personal information such as Social Security numbers, trade secrets of public bodies and tax standards used by the Department of Revenue, legal correspondence violating attorney-client privilege, certain police records that would harm the agency's effort in a specific case, contract documents until the contract is completed, including the sale of property, industrial development offers until the offer is accepted and announced. Is certain information specified as open to the public without question? Yes. Most importantly, any information taken from an account, voucher, or contract dealing with the receipt or expenditure of public funds is specified in the law as open, and you can request it. Also specified as open are names of employees, staff manuals and instructions, minutes of meetings, and law enforcement reports on crimes. Even salaries are public information, well, with certain limits. The FOIA requires the release of exact salaries of public employees who make $50,000 or more. Below that, salaries must be released in 4,000 ranges. FOIA and public meetings. Here we go. The law says a public meeting is a gathering of a quorum, simple majority of a public body, either in person or by telephone or computer, to discuss or act upon public business. Work sessions and hot committees, retreats, and subcommittee and committee meetings are covered by the law. All meetings of public bodies are open, and public notice of the meetings must be given 24 hours in advance to the meeting. As a public meeting, the council has no right to privacy concerning the meeting discussion, nor any right to copyrights of anything said or their person as a public representative of the public entity. This means the FOIA allows for a citizen attending a meeting to record audio, video, etc., just as long as it does not interfere with the meeting. Now here's the key. Interference is defined as a public nuisance to the proceedings taking place. This interference must only be caused by the citizen. The public official cannot create his or her own nuisance to subvert FOIA. So the standard for voting and meeting decorum is delineated in town ordinances and what is called Robert Rule of Order, which you can find online via rulesonline.com. It is said about Robert Rules of Order that the application of parliamentary law is the best method yet devised to enable assemblies of any size with due regard for every member's opinion to arrive at the general will on the maximum number of questions of varying complexity in a minimum amount of time and under all kinds of internal climate, ranging from total harmony to a hardened or impassioned division of opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by joining the Prime Minister in his remarks in relation to the honourable member for Bridgend? Yeah. Does the Prime Minister still think that he and the Chancellor are tax-cutting Conservatives?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly do, because this is the government that has just introduced not only the biggest cut in fuel duty ever, tax cut proposed by my right honourable friend the Chancellor for 25 years.
Keir Starmer, cut the nonsense and treat the British people with a bit of respect. Let me take him through this slowly. 15 tax rises, the highest tax burden for 70 years. For every £6 they're taking in tax rises, they're only handing £1 back.
As per Robert's Rule of Order, here is what a disturbance is defined as. These rules can also apply to a member of council. Number 1, speaking without being recognized by the presiding officer when not in order. Number 2, interrupting speakers without proper reason. Number 3, carrying on a private conversation during a meeting. Number 4, asking questions or making comments not relevant to the business at hand. Number 5, involving personalities in comments. Number 6, making frivolous motions. Number 7, arguing with the presiding officer, making unnecessary points of order or appeals from rulings of the chair. Number 8, making political speeches. Number 9, refusing to abide by a legitimate ruling or order of the presiding officer. Agendas for the upcoming meeting must be posted at least 24 hours prior, or there is a violation of FOIA. This should be reported in filing a complaint in the Court of Common Pleas. Each agenda for every month will be different. It must include the following though: a call to order, an invocation, not required, FOIA disclosure, a roll call to verify a quorum is present and that voting can occur, and previous meeting minutes review and vote to enact as official record. Department reports, public hearings and/or readings of new or updated ordinances to be enacted, an executive session if needed, return from executive session, and then adjournment. The only part of the meeting that cannot be recorded, transmitted, or public is executive session. Now, executive session was put in place to enable town council to discuss matters that are not privy to the rule of public disclosure. The rules are clear on what topics can be discussed, and it is never intended to become a way to subvert the public disclosure of debate, discussion, and voting. The rules are clear when and why the town council can go into executive session, as well as what can be done in executive session. South Carolina Code permits closing the meeting for an executive session. Exemptions include, according to South Carolina Code, discussion of employment, appointment, compensation, promotion, demotion, discipline, or release of an employee, a student, or a person regulated by a public body or that public body, or the appointment of a person to a public body. The identity of the individual or entity being discussed is not required to be disclosed. That's just the identity. Number 2, discussion of negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements and proposed sale or purchase property. The receipt of legal advice where the legal advice relates to a pending, threatened, or potential claim or other matters covered by the attorney-client privilege settlement. Settlement of legal claims or the position of the public agency in other adversary situations involving the assertion against the agency of a claim. There is a caveat to this, because although they're not required to disclose things like this, legal actions and what have you, against them, or vice versa, in executive session, there are ways to find out that information. In fact, most court cases are public information, so you can find out who is suing who, as well as find out the report or the case that's being brought up and read that information. So that's public information. You can actually find that. But as a public entity, they will not discuss the legalities of everything being discussed. Number 3, discussion regarding the development of security personnel or devices. Number 4, investigative proceedings regarding allegations of criminal misconduct. This is what can happen in executive session. This is the reasons to go into executive session. Number 5, discussion of matters relating to the proposed location, expansion, or the provision of services, encouraging location or expansion of industries or other businesses in the area served by the public body. The identity of the individual or entity being discussed is not required to be disclosed. Before a public body can go into a closed session, it first must vote in public on the question of going into a closed session, such as executive session. The motion to enter executive session should state one or more of the 5 specific purposes for the executive session. Specific purpose means a description of the specific matter to be discussed as identified in the law. However, when the executive session is held pursuant to personal or economic development matters, the identity of the individual or entity being discussed is not required to be disclosed to satisfy the requirement. If the vote is favorable, the presiding officer must announce the executive session's purpose or purposes. And that's according to Title 30, Chapter 4, Section 70. Council cannot take action in executive session except to adjourn or return to public session. That's state law. One method used by council which teeters on the fringe of a violation oftentimes is polling in executive session and then coming back to public meeting and then voting on what was polled on. Polling is an act of voting and should not be done in executive session for items that should be decided in public session. The purpose is accountability, along with confidentiality. Integrity in governance. The municipality must keep minutes for all meetings except executive sessions. If minutes of executive sessions are kept, they are not subject to public disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. However, they may be discoverable in a court action against them. Public meetings and the like have as their primary purpose disclosure of information as well as accountability and the act of governance. This includes the need for reviewing new ordinances, which can include even annual budgets. It's imperative that we understand that we as citizens have these rights covered under the Freedom of Information Act. And as a citizen, we have the right to hold our elected officials to a level of accountability via this state and federal law.